Hi, so I revamped my Asian American children's literature lecture, and I redo my lectures every semester. I update them, I eliminate things, but this one has really given me trouble for lots of reasons, and I just think I'm just going to go through it with you. The deal is there are so many different ethnicities, subcultures under the umbrella of Asian American. I really don't even know where to begin. I'm not sure how to even reflect it kind of in a common way. And I'm realizing that that's good. That's a good thing because we don't want to lump any cultures together. And we're learning more and more as we go on that there's ways not to do this. So, for example, for the Asian American ethnicities, the cultures in the US, there's so many. Just check it out right here. Just so many, right? This is from the Pew Trust research. So, pretty amazing stuff. So, all of this, and then let's add a little bit more there because we're adding the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander population, right? We have the Asian Indian there. We've just got just about everybody. And then we just have to get even a little more specific because we're uh, talking about Desi Americans instead of Indian Americans. That's a new maybe more accurate and respectful way to put it all. So we've got all this, right? A great diversity of identities and ethnicities under this whole umbrella of Asian America, which is now kind of delineating out a little bit more, right? So we want to really respect that. But then there's the problem of the term Asian Pacific Islander. So that, unbeknownst to me, is kind of a controversial thing to connect that culture, that ethnicity, with the whole Asian American umbrella. And I thought this was a really good point in there that it's a kind of different, it's a different fight, right? A lot of Asian Americans, worrying about immigration issues and all of that, but Pacific Islanders are worrying more about sovereignty and decolonization. Everybody took over their land, so it's kind of a different ball game going on for all of this. So again, I sit here a little confused as to how I can really reflect this whole genre of children's literature in one fell swoop. And so I'm stumbling here. So the 2020 census, uh, I learned, well, it's actually 2019. So that's the latest thing I have for the highest Asian American populations in the United States. So here they are in order. But what do we mostly talk about in our academic work, in a lot of our children's work, and when we're representing Asian American cultures in our classrooms? We talk mostly about Japanese American and Chinese American. And the deal is that there's so much more to talk about, right? By doing this, we fail to recognize lots of things. The contemporary Asian American experience, for one thing, not the whole stuck in the past stuff. And then the diversity beyond the Chinese and Japanese American, right? Americans. So it's been a really interesting thing. When we look at some of the state standards that we use, Common Cores and all that stuff, and um, the whole umbrella of Asian Americans are just like, boom, not really in our books, not in our texts, not in our curriculum that much. And when they are, again, usually talking only about Chinese and Japanese. And then when they talk about Chinese and Japanese Americans, whoa, they're just talking about the really awful stuff and never give them kind of the swagger, that swagger that some of our other cultures have gotten coming here, right? They're always kind of like, oh, you don't belong here, or you're an enemy of the state. Some examples for in the 1800s when we brought Chinese immigrants over to do some of our laboring work, right, such as railroads, and then this is a propaganda thing about washing machines, right? Because there was a lot of launderers, Chinese launderers, and just totally misrepresented and stereotyped and really disrespected. I thought this was interesting. It was a family in California that sued in order to get their daughter Mamie to be able to attend a high school. So some really abject discrimination against Chinese Americans during our early history, right? And this is just a horrific one, but I got to bring it up. And this was mostly in San Francisco area, but uh, one of the few options for Chinese immigrant females, because some of them were not women, they were girls, was prostitution, forced prostitution, just to kind of survive. And then we look at the Japanese American debacle, and we mostly focus on the whole internment camps that transpired during uh, World War II, right? Where we took all these citizens, and I've talked about this before, we took citizens from all over the United States and threw them into camps. It specifically happened here on Bainbridge Island, first place for it to take off. So really awful stuff. And so why we might be doing a little bit better with not only talking about how we rejected and hated and did not welcome these citizens into our country. A lot of times when we look at Asian American, the umbrella of Asian American cultures, we just again perpetuate stereotypes. And this is maybe like, oh wow, model minority is supposed to be a good one, right? It's like, ooh, Asian Americans are so smart. They just excel in everything, play the violin, really great in school, really great kids to their parents and stuff. And so I thought this was interesting that relative to stereotypes of other racial minorities, the model minority stereotype appears to be positive and flattering. Indeed, what could be wrong with being described as smart and hardworking? Despite the privileges that I may at times enjoy from being cast as a model minority, history tells us that the label is dangerous. Yeah, because you're being compared to others. Not a great idea. And so then we get the stereotype of Asian Americans being foreigners, never really fitting in, right? That look at what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II. There was generations, at least two generations of Japanese Americans here. They were still considered still foreigners and a threat to the United States, right? And where they were put in internment camps, so never fitting in. And we have a kind of current one right now in terms of some stereotypes with the uh, coronavirus and how it's been degraded to some really racial slurs, and not only just racism in this way, but also direct threats to people's well-being, to Chinese Americans' well-being. So we've done some really crazy and crummy things. And when we look at children's books, a lot of times when we're looking at Asian American cultures, we're looking at something from the past. We talked about it a lot for American Indians that we're looking at. We just see these people only from the past, only in exotic, kind of far away, beautiful, blurry terms, right? A good example is The Five Chinese Brothers, and that's a book that I mentioned way back at the first lecture, I believe. And it's a book that is really still popular to use. And I love this quote. When I was a child, the teacher read, "Once upon a time, there were five Chinese brothers, and they all looked exactly alike. Cautiously, the pairs of eyes stole a quick glance back. I, the child, looked down to the floor. The teacher turned the book our way. Bilious, yellow skin, slanted slit eyes. Not only were the brothers lookalikes, but so were all the other characters. Quickly again, all eyes flashed back at me. I sank into my seat." A horrific representation of somebody's culture, right, in a classroom where you're being made fun of. And again, as I've talked about, this is an old book. I think old book. It was published, I believe, in 1942. That's old because that's how old I am, and it's still in circulation. This was a picture I took about a half a year ago, maybe at Cost Plus. Is that what it's called? The World Market. World Market. That's what it's called now, right? So we still have these kinds of books in the hands of educators, parents, caregivers, whatever, and we're still perpetuating lots of stereotypes. This is a great example of continuing to do this. So this book, Tiki Tiki Timbo, maybe some of you had it. If you grew up in the United States, you had it in your classroom because teachers use it all the time. And it's just kind of horrific, really, because it's supposed to be an ancient Chinese tale written by a white woman. And, um, and it's supposed to be this rich, historical, mythical, like wonderful thing. Well, the deal is that it's not Chinese at all. In fact, if you look at the clothing and stuff, it's all Japanese. And what it ended up being was that it's a Japanese tale, and someone decided to make it a Chinese tale, some American, white American. And so again, a real racist kind of slur, like, oh yeah, they all look alike, right? And so what does it matter? The deal is teachers use this ticky ticky timbo all of the time. You can get a kabillion lesson plans for it. And, and so you might be thinking, like, okay, not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. It's a big deal because it perpetuates stereotypes. It's reckless about culture. It's disrespectful. And it's really, really inaccurate. I just came across this today. What's today? Today is Thursday, October 22nd. So when I was looking at more, and I kind of liked it. I hope that people realize that Tiki Tiki Timbo contains very incorrect information about Chinese culture. Naming your first child a long, long name and second child a name of little or nothing is not true at all in Chinese culture. Tiki Tiki Timbo, Nosa Rimbo, Cherry Berry, Ruchi, Pip, Perry, Pimbo simply bears no resemblance to a Chinese name, right? And so again, in Chinese culture, it's important to understand that one needs to know the meaning of a character when naming a child. The length has no importance. So it's just, again, a bunch of BS. And so the deal is that these were the kind of books we only had our hands on for a long time, right? We had folk tales and things from when we wanted to talk about other cultures, but that was a long time ago, and we've got much better books now. So why do we continue to use racist and inaccurate books when we want to bring culture into the classroom or culture into our home? I mean, why do we do this? It's wretched. And it still happens, right? So the whole idea that we're going to do that whole single story thing, the whole single story about different ethnicities, different cultures, and again, treating a lot of our citizens as kind of foreigners and underdogs and not being able to assimilate, right? Remember, we're all supposed to assimilate, and what are we supposed to assimilate to? The white dominant culture. So I'm not saying these aren't great, interesting books. A lot of them are not Tiki Tiki Timbo, but they're fun and beautiful and favorite stories or myths or old tales, folk tales, really important, right? But if it's the only story you're hearing about a culture, then that's what children are going to think that culture is. Only that, the single story. And again, so folk tales was a big thing to use, but it just perpetuates stereotypes and really important, keeps Asian Americans exotified, foreigners objectified, just kind of out there somewhere, right? So other books that are really bad too is to do really contemporary stereotypes, right? All about Hawaii, a picture book for kids about Hawaii. First of all, they don't even look like any Hawaiians, and they're just doing again the typical stereotypes of that culture. Nothing necessarily contemporary, nothing that this culture does above and beyond the stereotypes. And again, important stuff, but still stereotypes, still the single story. This is a great example of that as well. That we're only going to look at festivals, holidays, and traditions. When we reflect a whole culture, that's all we're going to do. We're going to take important things, fun things, festive things, and that's all we're going to talk about, which really paints just one side of the story, just one side. I don't know why that's in there. So again, when we were talking about like this umbrella term of Asian Pacific Islander Desi Americans, APIDA, I just have to put it that way right now, are caught in a triple bind, pressured to remain faithful to ancestral heritage while at the same time admonished to assimilate and become fully American, fully dominant culture American. But ultimately find that because of their Asianness, right, that many Americans will consider them to be foreigners still, right? So it's a real double bind and it's really horrific and wretched. what a lot of scholars are asking for is authentic representation, right? That's what we want. That's what we want for all of our ethnicities, for all of our children. And we do that through children's books. We also do it first. This example is we do it through media as well too, which is getting kind of better for some Asian American ethnicities, right? This is the Crazy Rich Americans, excuse me, Crazy Rich Asians. Wow, wasn't that something that we had a whole mainstream popular movie that didn't have any white people in it? That that was reflective of a whole culture that does everything that most other people do. It was awesome in terms of that. It's really opened the door for other media representations of just like everyday people, right? We don't want to just have our books and our media just show some of our ethnicity, some of our cultures way, 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 way back in Nowheresville. Another really cute, I just love this one. Oh, wait, I got it. Oh, yeah, I can't go backwards, but in the previous quote that with the Crazy Rich Americans, it talks about like how culture is reflected in a really poignant way, a really important way for the specific Asian culture, and how it just makes your heart feel really good whether you're of that culture or not. It educates some of us and it just heartens the rest of us. So it's really cool. And Bao did that with food and culture and Chinese culture, and Crazy Rich Asians did that as well. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we reflect just a whole generous bounty of specific and general Asian American ethnicity and cultures, and we just like really just eat it up, literally, because you'll see this. I have this cartoon in the video cartoon in the really fun video. So do take a peek at it. It's really a good one. So I'm going to ask the same kinds of things that I've asked a million times before. What do we do? How do we counter sexist and racist messages? We change the message. We make sure that we reflect all of our diverse cultures in the United States. We reflect them accurately, respectfully, right? And in that way, we raise children that are not going to fall on some of the mistakes that we have fallen on in our society, as reflected in current topical events. That's just a long winded way of saying we're going to do a better job because children are going to be able to see themselves in books, which is really important, but also so important. They're going to see other kids, other families, other cultures, other ethnicities, other ideas in books, which is really, really important too. It's so important. Ugh. So I love this book, Lissy Friends. I love Grace Lynn. You're going to be looking at a TED Talk of hers. Oh my gosh, it's just perfect. So the cool thing about Grace Lynn is that she incorporates her culture, her Chinese American culture into her books, but she keeps them contemporary too. So it's not like this is Lissy. She's from not that long ago. She's like around your block. She's in your neighborhood. She lives there. It's not from a million years ago, and you're mystified and baffled, right? So that's really important. Change the message with great books. And doesn't this one look fabulous? Ah, change the message. Wonderful book that's written by the Olympic medalist, the what do you call it, fencing one? Ah, totally great. So I'm going to be asking you to do this activity. You'll see it, and it's just you've got to look at it as Asian American artists, young artists like your ages, and it's so gorgeous. You have to check that out. And again, this is what I want you to check out as well in the TED Talk. Just a beautiful way of looking at windows and mirrors and how important it is. That's one of our main themes in this class, right? Is that we change the message by making sure that we have authentic, first person, beautiful, resonating children's books for everybody. and that will help change the world. Ta-da! That's my message to you today. Thank you.